Margaret Sullivan's weathered hands froze on the kitchen window latch, her 72-year-old heart skipping as the massive black bear emerged from the Montana pines. The 600-pound creature moved with deliberate purpose toward 8-year-old Emma Grace, who sat crying alone by the sanctuary fence, her small frame shaking with grief that had consumed her for 3 months since her mother's death. Thunder wasn't supposed to approach humans, ever. The coffee mug slipped from Maggie's grip, shattering against the hardwood floor as the bear lowered himself beside the child with impossible gentleness. Emma's sobs quieted to whispers, her tiny hand reaching toward fur that could kill her with a single swipe. Maggie's breath caught in her throat, memories of another child, another loss, 15 years ago, flooding back with crushing force. "Sweet Jesus," she whispered, fumbling for her phone. But something in Thunder's posture, protective, almost reverent, stopped her cold. What was happening in her sanctuary? And why did this moment feel like destiny arriving on 4 massive paws? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Margaret Maggie Sullivan had weathered 72 Montana winters, buried a husband and lost a son, but nothing had prepared her for the sight unfolding in her backyard. 3 months earlier, when the state social worker first brought Emma Grace Chen Williams to Sullivan Ranch Wildlife Sanctuary, Maggie had seen herself in those hollow, grief-stricken eyes. The child's mother, investigative journalist Rebecca Williams, had died in what authorities called a tragic car accident on Highway 2, leaving behind an 8-year-old daughter with no living relatives and a heart condition that required constant monitoring. "She needs therapeutic interaction with animals," Dr. Marcus Thompson had explained during Emma's first visit. "The trauma has left her withdrawn, almost catatonic. Traditional therapy isn't working." Marcus ran the sanctuary's rehabilitation program with the kind of gentle expertise that came from his own devastating loss. His 5-year-old daughter had drowned in Flathead Lake while he was presenting at a veterinary conference. The guilt had driven him from his lucrative private practice to this remote sanctuary where broken animals and broken people found solace together. Maggie's ranch sprawled across 500 acres of protected wilderness, home to rescued bears, wolves, and eagles that couldn't survive in the wild. She'd inherited the land from her late husband Harold, a man who'd dreamed of creating a haven for Montana's displaced wildlife. After losing their 7-year-old son Tommy in a hiking accident 15 years ago, the sanctuary became Maggie's lifeline, her reason to wake up each morning. But financial reality was crushing that dream. $847,000 in debt, with foreclosure papers already filed. Thunder had arrived as an orphaned cub 6 years ago, found near the same mountain trail where Tommy had disappeared. The massive black bear possessed an unusual intelligence that both fascinated and unnerved the staff. Unlike other rescued bears, Thunder seemed to understand human emotions, often positioning himself near visitors who displayed signs of distress. His most distinctive feature was a crescent-shaped mark on his forehead, pale against his dark fur. Not quite a scar, more like a birthmark that caught the light in certain ways. Emma's weekly visits had become the highlight of Maggie's routine. The child rarely spoke, communicating instead through drawings of animals and sad-eyed figures that broke Maggie's heart. Foster families had tried and failed to connect with Emma, overwhelmed by her medical needs and emotional withdrawal. She carried her mother's silver locket everywhere, clutching it during panic attacks that left her gasping and pale. The financial pressure was becoming unbearable. Bank representatives called daily, and Maggie's political connections from her years as Montana State Senator could only delay the inevitable for so long. At night, she sat in Harold's old chair, staring at foreclosure notices and wondering if losing the sanctuary would honor or betray Tommy's memory. The boy had loved every creature on the ranch, spending hours talking to the animals as if they understood every word. Now, watching Thunder cradle Emma with impossible tenderness, Maggie felt something shift in the universe, a recognition that defied explanation but demanded trust. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sanctuary as Emma's foster parents, the Hendersons, dropped her off for what they grimly suspected might be her final visit. Mrs. Henderson had spoken in hushed tones with Dr. Thompson about Emma's worsening condition. The child barely ate, rarely slept, and seemed to be fading away like a flower without sunlight. "She keeps asking about that bear," Mrs. Henderson had confided to Maggie the week before. "Thunder this, thunder that. It's not natural, the way she talks about him like he's family." Emma walked slowly toward Thunder's enclosure, her small hand pressed against the silver locket at her throat. The bear had been restless for days, refusing his favorite treats and pacing the perimeter of his habitat with an agitation that concerned Dr. Thompson. The sanctuary's other animals seemed on edge too, as if sensing some disturbance in the natural order. "Thunder?" Emma called softly, approaching the reinforced fence that separated visitors from the massive predator. "You look sad. Are you thinking about someone you miss?" The bear's reaction was immediate and unprecedented. Thunder, who had never shown interest in human visitors beyond mild curiosity, moved directly to the fence where Emma stood. His enormous paws, each larger than dinner plates, came to rest against the metal barrier just inches from the child's face. The low rumble that emerged from his chest wasn't a growl of warning, it was something else entirely. A sound of recognition that raised goosebumps on Maggie's arms as she watched from the observation deck. Dr. Thompson rushed over, his training screaming warnings about the dangerous proximity between child and predator. But what he witnessed defied every principle of animal behavior he'd studied. Thunder was exhibiting what could only be described as gentle protectiveness, his massive head tilted as if listening to Emma's whispered words. "I know you understand me," Emma continued, her voice barely audible. "Mama always said animals have feelings just like people. She said some of them even have souls that remember things." Her small fingers touched the fence where Thunder's paw rested. "Do you remember someone, big guy? Someone who made you feel safe?" The bear's response sent chills through every observer. Thunder carefully extended one claw through the fence mesh, not in aggression but in the gentlest possible touch against Emma's palm. The child didn't flinch, didn't cry out in fear. Instead, for the first time in 3 months, she smiled. Maggie's legs nearly gave out beneath her. That smile transformed Emma's face from a mask of grief into something radiant. And in that moment, the old woman saw something that made her heart race with impossible hope. The child's features, softened by joy, reminded her powerfully of another face, Tommy's face when he'd laughed at Thunder's predecessor, a smaller black bear named Midnight who had lived at the sanctuary during his childhood. "Marcus," Maggie called urgently, her voice shaking. "Come here. Look at that mark on Thunder's forehead, the crescent shape. Look at it carefully." Dr. Thompson approached with his binoculars, studying the bear's distinctive marking. "It's always been there, Maggie. We assumed it was a birth defect or maybe scarring from his early trauma. Why?" Maggie's weathered hands trembled as she gripped the railing. Tommy had been born with an identical mark, a pale, crescent-shaped birthmark on his forehead that had faded as he grew older but never completely disappeared. The doctors had called it a capillary malformation, common in newborns but unusual for its perfect crescent shape. "That mark," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. Tommy had the exact same mark, in the exact same place. The implications of what she was suggesting were impossible, yet the evidence stood before them. Thunder had been found as an orphaned cub in the same forest where Tommy had disappeared. The timing aligned perfectly. 6 years since Thunder's rescue, 15 years since Tommy's death. But it was more than coincidence. It was the way Thunder responded to grief, the way he seemed to understand human pain with an intelligence that transcended normal animal behavior. Emma remained at the fence, speaking to Thunder in the soft, sing-song voice children used with beloved pets. "Mama used to read me stories about guardian angels," she told the bear. "She said they don't always look like people in the pictures. Sometimes they come in different shapes to help us when we need them most." As if responding to her words, Thunder moved closer to the fence, his enormous bulk settling into a protective posture that any observer would recognize as profoundly unnatural for a wild animal. The bear's dark eyes remained fixed on Emma with an intensity that spoke of recognition, of purpose, of something deeper than instinct. Dr. Thompson lowered his binoculars, his scientific mind struggling to process what his heart was beginning to accept. "Maggie," he said quietly, "I think we need to talk." The tranquil morning shattered when a black sedan pulled into the sanctuary's gravel driveway, followed by a white van bearing the logo of First National Bank of Montana. Maggie's stomach dropped as she recognized the lead figure emerging from the sedan. Harold Brennan, the bank's foreclosure specialist, a man whose cold efficiency had destroyed more family dreams than Montana's harsh winters. "Mrs. Sullivan," Brennan called out, his voice carrying across the yard with the authority of legal documents and unpaid debts. "We need to discuss your situation immediately." Emma looked up from her conversation with Thunder, her face clouding with confusion as she sensed the adult tension crackling through the air. Dr. Thompson quickly moved to position himself between the child and the approaching officials, his protective instincts flaring. Brennan unfolded a manila envelope with practiced precision. "I'm serving you with final notice. You have 72 hours to remit payment of $847,312, or this property will enter foreclosure proceedings. I'm sorry, Mrs. Sullivan, but the bank can no longer extend additional time." The words hit Maggie like physical blows. 72 hours, 3 days to save everything she and Harold had built, everything that kept Tommy's memory alive. Her political connections had bought her time before, but even former state senators couldn't work miracles when the numbers were this stark. "There has to be something we can do." Dr. Thompson stepped forward, his voice tight with desperation. "This sanctuary serves the entire state. We have rehabilitation programs, educational initiatives." "Dr. Thompson," Brennan interrupted with practiced politeness, "I understand the emotional attachment, but business is business. The property has significant value for development. We have interested buyers ready to close immediately." Emma's sharp intake of breath cut through the conversation like a knife. The 8-year-old had been listening, and her face had gone pale with the kind of terror that only children facing abandonment could understand. "They're going to take Thunder away?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Emma stumbled backward, her small body beginning to shake as the full implications crashed over her. First her mother, now Thunder, now the only place where she'd found any peace. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, the early signs of the panic attacks that had plagued her since Rebecca's death. "Sweetheart," Maggie began, reaching toward the child, but Emma was already collapsing. The attack came swiftly and mercilessly. Emma's legs gave out, her body convulsing as her damaged heart struggled to cope with the emotional trauma. "Doctor." Thompson caught her before she hit the ground, immediately checking her pulse while shouting for someone to call 911. "Her heart rate is through the roof," he said grimly, cradling Emma's limp form. "She needs immediate medical attention." Thunder's reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. The massive bear rose to his full height against the fence, releasing a roar that echoed across the mountains and sent every other animal in the sanctuary into alarmed silence. His enormous paws clawed at the metal barrier, his eyes fixed on Emma's motionless form with an intensity that made even the bank officials step backward. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but the paramedics' examination revealed what everyone had been dreading. Emma's congenital heart defect, already severe, had been exacerbated by months of grief and stress. The lead paramedic, a weathered man named Jake Morrison, delivered the devastating news with clinical precision. "She needs immediate surgical intervention," Morrison explained as they prepared to transport Emma. "We're talking about a minimum of $350,000 for the procedure, and that's if everything goes perfectly. Without it—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Mrs. Henderson, who had arrived after receiving the emergency call, stood wringing her hands beside the ambulance. "We can't afford that kind of money," she admitted tearfully. "Our insurance won't cover experimental procedures for foster children. The state program has limitations." Emma's eyes fluttered open as they loaded her onto the stretcher, her gaze immediately seeking Thunder. The bear had never stopped his agitated pacing, his distress palpable even to the emergency responders who gave his enclosure a wide berth. "Don't let them take me away from Thunder," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the ambulance's diesel engine. "Please, Mrs. Sullivan." "He's all I have left that understands." The word shattered something inside Maggie's chest. Looking at Emma's pale, desperate face, she saw Tommy in those final moments before he disappeared into the forest. That same mixture of fear and trust, that same need for someone to promise everything would be okay. "Over my dead body," Maggie declared, her voice carrying the steel that had once commanded respect in the Montana legislature. "You're staying right here, sweetheart, whatever it takes." But even as she made the promise, the cruel mathematics of their situation crystallized. Emma needed $350,000 for surgery. The sanctuary needed $847,000 to avoid foreclosure. In 72 hours, they would lose everything unless Maggie could produce over $1 million, money she simply didn't have. As the ambulance pulled away with Emma inside, Thunder's anguished roars continued to echo across the valley. Maggie stared at the bear's distinctive crescent mark, her mind racing with impossible connections and desperate plans. Somewhere in the chaos of financial ruin and medical crisis, a deeper mystery was unfolding, one that connected a grieving child, a protective bear, and the ghost of a little boy who had vanished 15 years ago. The foreclosure papers fluttered in the mountain breeze, their legal language unable to capture the human cost of institutional indifference. Maggie crumpled them in her fist, her jaw set with the determination that had once made her one of Montana's most formidable politicians. 72 hours to save a child, a bear, and a dream. The clock was ticking, and failure wasn't an option. The sterile fluorescent lights of Kalispell Regional Medical Center cast harsh shadows across Emma's pale face, as monitors beeped their steady rhythm, each sound a reminder of the fragile thread keeping the child tethered to life. Maggie had refused to leave the hospital chair beside Emma's bed, her weathered hands wrapped around the child's small fingers while Dr. Thompson coordinated with the medical team. "The surgery needs to happen within 48 hours. Dr. Patricia Reeves, the pediatric cardiac surgeon, explained with gentle firmness. "Emma's condition is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. The emotional trauma has put additional strain on an already compromised heart." Mrs. Henderson stood by the window, her face etched with the helpless frustration of bureaucratic limitations. "The state's emergency medical fund can cover basic care, but experimental cardiac procedures for foster children. There are forms, committees, waiting periods. We're looking at weeks or months for approval." "She doesn't have weeks." Maggie's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to cutting through red tape. "Dr. Reeves, if I can guarantee payment, can you perform the surgery tomorrow?" Dr. Reeves nodded slowly. "If funding is secured by noon tomorrow, we can have her in surgery by evening. But Mrs. Sullivan, we're talking about $350,000. The hospital requires payment confirmation before proceeding with elective procedures of this magnitude. Maggie's phone buzzed with another call from Harold Brennan at the bank. She'd been ignoring his increasingly urgent messages about the foreclosure timeline, but time was running out on every front. Making a decision that would have seemed impossible a week ago, she stepped into the hospital corridor to make a series of calls that would either save everything or destroy it completely. Governor Hartwell, it's Maggie Sullivan. I need a favor, and I need it now. 20 years of political capital, carefully cultivated relationships, and mutual obligations were about to be called in all at once. Maggie had helped Governor Patricia Hartwell win her first election, had backed her through 3 terms, and now it was time to collect on old promises. Back at the sanctuary, Dr. Thompson faced his own crisis. Thunder had not eaten in 36 hours, his distress over Emma's absence manifesting in behaviors that alarmed even seasoned wildlife experts. The bear paced constantly, his massive frame wearing grooves in the earth along his enclosure's perimeter. More troubling, he had begun displaying signs of self-harm, repeatedly striking his head against the fence posts until Marcus feared for the animal's safety. "I've never seen anything like it," Marcus confided to his assistant, Sarah Martinez, as they observed Thunder's erratic behavior. "It's as if he understands that Emma is in mortal danger." The depth of his emotional response defies everything we know about bear psychology. Sarah, a graduate student in veterinary medicine, had been documenting Thunder's unusual behaviors for her thesis. The attachment patterns are unprecedented. Look at these stress hormone readings from his blood work. They're consistent with what we'd expect to see in a human experiencing profound grief. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away in Washington, D.C., an investigation that had been dormant for 3 months suddenly roared back to life. FBI agent Jennifer Hayes had been reviewing the case files surrounding Rebecca Williams's death when anomalies in the official reports caught her attention. The journalist's car accident had occurred on a straight stretch of Highway 2 during clear weather conditions, yet the skid marks suggested Rebecca had swerved to avoid something that wasn't there. More intriguing were Rebecca's final articles, published posthumously by her editor at the environmental magazine Montana Wild. She had been investigating a sophisticated wildlife trafficking operation, following paper trails that led from legitimate sanctuaries to illegal, exotic animal markets. Her last notes, recovered from her laptop, contained references to genetic anomalies and behavioral modifications that suggested the trafficking ring was involved in more than simple capture and sale. Agent Hayes had tried to contact the Sullivan Ranch Wildlife Sanctuary multiple times, knowing that Rebecca had visited there frequently in the weeks before her death. The sanctuary's connection to the story was unclear, but Rebecca's notebook contained dozens of references to Thunder and sketches of what appeared to be unusual animal behavioral patterns. At the hospital, Emma stirred from her medication-induced sleep to find Maggie dozing in the bedside chair. The child's movement triggered a gentle alarm that woke the older woman, who immediately leaned forward with concern. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Maggie asked, her voice hoarse from hours of phone negotiations. "Is Thunder okay?" Emma's first question, predictably, concerned the bear rather than her own condition. "He gets scared when he can't see me. Mama used to say some animals need their people more than people need them." The innocent statement hit Maggie like a physical blow. Tommy had said something remarkably similar the day before he disappeared, talking about how midnight the bear had seemed sad when visitors left the sanctuary. The parallel was too precise to be coincidence, too specific to dismiss as childhood imagination. "Emma," Maggie began carefully, "tell me about your dreams. Since you started visiting Thunder, have you had any unusual dreams?" The child's eyes widened with recognition. You mean the dreams about the boy? The one who looks like the pictures Mama showed me of angels. He has the same mark on his forehead that Thunder has. Maggie's heart stopped. Emma had never seen photographs of Tommy, had never been told about Maggie's lost son. Yet her description was achingly accurate, down to details that only family members would know. "The boy in your dreams," Maggie whispered, her voice trembling. "Does he tell you things?" Emma nodded solemnly. "He says he's watching over me until I don't need watching anymore. He says Thunder is his way of keeping me safe because he can't do it himself." Her small hand reached for her mother's locket, clutching it tightly. "Mama always said love doesn't end when people go to heaven. Maybe it just finds new ways to show itself." The profound wisdom in Emma's words shattered the last of Maggie's emotional defenses. Tears streamed down the old woman's cheeks as 15 years of grief and guilt finally found release. Whether through divine intervention, impossible coincidence, or something beyond human understanding, Tommy was still trying to protect children who needed protection. Dr. Thompson arrived with news that shifted the entire trajectory of their crisis. "Maggie, we've got a problem. James Patterson from the Wildlife Conservation Board is here with a court order. He's demanding that Thunder be relocated to a maximum security facility pending a psychological evaluation." Patterson, a stern man in his 50s with prematurely gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority, had a reputation for swift action when he believed public safety was at risk. His arrival at the sanctuary coincided suspiciously with Emma's medical emergency, as if he had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Mr. Patterson," Maggie confronted him in the hospital corridor, her political instincts fully engaged. "What's your real interest in Thunder?" "Because I find it remarkably convenient that you show up now, when Emma needs him most." Patterson's smile was cold and calculated. "Mrs. Sullivan, I understand your emotional attachment, but that animal has exhibited dangerous behavioral patterns. His agitation over the child's absence proves he's formed an unhealthy psychological bond. Such animals become unpredictable, potentially violent." "Or," Dr. Thompson interjected, "he's demonstrating emotional intelligence and empathic responses that could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies relationships." The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of Governor Hartwell herself, flanked by her legal team and accompanied by Dr. Elena Rodriguez, one of the nation's leading experts in animal-assisted therapy. The governor's presence transformed the hospital corridor into an impromptu political arena where Emma's fate would be decided. "Mr. Patterson," Governor Hartwell's voice carried the authority of executive power, "I'm here to inform you that the state of Montana is taking a special interest in this case. We're implementing an emergency protocol that will allow Thunder to remain at Sullivan Ranch pending a comprehensive study of his therapeutic potential." Patterson's composure cracked slightly. "Governor, with all due respect, you're setting a dangerous precedent. We can't allow emotional manipulation to override established safety protocols." "No," the governor replied firmly. "We can't allow bureaucratic inflexibility to override a child's right to life-saving medical intervention. Dr. Rodriguez has reviewed the case files, and her preliminary assessment suggests that Thunder's presence is not just beneficial to Emma's emotional state, it may be medically necessary for her recovery." As the adults debated Emma's future, the child herself slept fitfully, her dreams filled with visions of a boy with kind eyes and a crescent-shaped mark who promised that everything would be okay if she just held on a little longer. In those dreams, Thunder's massive form stood guard at the edge of consciousness, a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of protective love that transcends physical boundaries. The next 12 hours would determine whether love, determination, and political intervention could overcome the combined forces of financial ruin and institutional indifference. But for now, as the Montana sunset painted the hospital windows gold, hope flickered like a candle flame in the gathering darkness. The operating room doors swung open at exactly 6:47 p.m., 36 hours after Emma's collapse, as Dr. Patricia Reeves emerged with the exhausted expression of a surgeon who had just performed a miracle. Maggie rose from the waiting room chair where she'd maintained vigil, her entire body trembling with anticipation and dread. The surgery was successful, Dr. Reeves announced, and the collective exhale from Emma's makeshift family filled the sterile corridor. We were able to repair the septal defect and reconstruct the damaged valve tissue. Her heart is strong, Mrs. Sullivan, stronger than we dared hope. Governor Hartwell, who had remained at the hospital throughout the procedure, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. When can she see her bear? Dr. Reeves smiled, the first genuine emotion she'd shown since the crisis began. That's the remarkable part. Her vital signs stabilized the moment we wheeled her into recovery. It's as if she knew the worst was over. I've never seen a child fight so hard to survive, and I suspect her motivation has 4 legs and weighs 600 pounds. At the sanctuary, Thunder's behavior had undergone an equally dramatic transformation. The massive bear, who had been inconsolable for 2 days, suddenly calmed during the exact hours of Emma's surgery. Dr. Thompson, monitoring the bear's stress levels through remote cameras, watched in amazement as Thunder settled into a peaceful sleep for the first time since Emma's collapse. "It's impossible," Sarah Martinez whispered, reviewing the time-stamped data. Thunder's cortisol levels dropped to normal at 6:15 p.m., 30 minutes before the surgery ended. How could he know? Marcus shook his head, long past trying to apply conventional science to Thunder's behavior. Some bonds transcend our understanding. Maybe that's not a flaw in our knowledge. Maybe it's the most important thing we'll ever learn. The financial miracle that had made Emma's surgery possible revealed itself in pieces throughout the night. Governor Hartwell had mobilized the state's emergency medical fund, but the real salvation came from an unexpected source. Maggie's decades of political service had created a network of obligations and friendships that extended far beyond Montana's borders. Senator Elizabeth Warren had contacted her Harvard colleagues in the medical research community. Dr. Michael Chen at Johns Hopkins had been seeking a pediatric case study for his groundbreaking cardiac regeneration research. Emma's unique condition, combined with her documented emotional bond with Thunder, created an opportunity for research that could benefit thousands of children. The NIH is providing full funding, Governor Hartwell explained to Maggie as they watched Emma sleep peacefully in the ICU. $350,000 for immediate care, plus an additional $2 million for ongoing research into animal-assisted cardiac rehabilitation. Emma will receive the best care available anywhere in the world, and Thunder becomes part of the most advanced therapeutic animal program ever developed. But even as Emma's medical crisis reached resolution, darker forces were mobilizing. James Patterson's aggressive pursuit of Thunder's removal had attracted attention from FBI agent Jennifer Hayes, who recognized his name from Rebecca Williams' investigation notes. Patterson had been mentioned multiple times in the journalist's research into wildlife trafficking, always in the context of facilities that had lost valuable animals under suspicious circumstances. Agent Hayes arrived at the hospital at midnight, her federal credentials opening doors that had been closed to local law enforcement. "Mrs. Sullivan, I need to ask you about Rebecca Williams' visits to your sanctuary." Her final articles suggest she discovered something significant about wildlife trafficking operations, and your facility was mentioned repeatedly in her notes. Maggie's exhaustion made her more direct than usual. Agent Hayes, I'll tell you everything I know, but first you need to understand something about James Patterson. His interest in Thunder isn't about public safety, it's about something else entirely. The revelation came through Emma herself. As the child drifted in and out of medicated sleep, she spoke about conversations with her mother that no one else had been privy to. Rebecca Williams had discovered that certain wildlife trafficking operations weren't just moving animals illegally. They were specifically targeting animals with unusual behavioral traits, genetic anomalies, or extraordinary intelligence. Mama said some people collect special animals like other people collect art, Emma murmured, her voice barely audible above the medical equipment. She said Thunder was special in ways that made him valuable to bad people. That's why she came to see him so many times. Agent Hayes leaned forward, her investigative instincts fully engaged. Emma, did your mother ever mention anyone specific? Any names or organizations? The child's eyes fluttered open, focusing with surprising clarity. She was scared of a man who worked for the government. Said he pretended to protect animals but really hurt them. She had pictures of him visiting places where animals disappeared. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place with devastating clarity. Patterson's sudden appearance at the sanctuary, his determination to remove Thunder despite the bear's obvious therapeutic value, his knowledge of Emma's medical crisis, all of it suggested a level of surveillance and planning that went far beyond bureaucratic concern for public safety. Dr. Thompson, who had been quietly observing the conversation, suddenly straightened with alarm. If Patterson is part of a trafficking operation, Thunder is in immediate danger. These people don't just steal animals, they eliminate evidence when investigations get too close. The urgency of the situation crystallized when Agent Hayes received a call from her field office. Patterson's been in contact with private transport services. He's arranged for Thunder to be moved tomorrow morning to a facility in Nevada that's been on our watch list for months. Governor Hartwell's response was swift and decisive. Not if I have anything to say about it. Montana wildlife stays in Montana, especially when that wildlife is providing medical therapy to a child under state protection. But even gubernatorial power had limitations when federal wildlife regulations were involved. Patterson had carefully constructed his legal justification, citing interstate commerce laws and endangered species protocols that gave him broad authority to relocate animals he deemed potentially dangerous. The showdown came at dawn as two competing convoys converged on Sullivan Ranch. Patterson arrived with federal marshals and a specialized animal transport team, their paperwork meticulously prepared and legally unassailable. Governor Hartwell's team included state wildlife officials, representatives from the Attorney General's office, and Dr. Rodriguez with emergency medical documentation of Emma's dependence on Thunder's presence. Thunder, as if sensing the approaching crisis, positioned himself at the center of his enclosure with calm dignity. The bear's massive frame radiated an almost regal composure, his dark eyes moving between the assembled officials with what could only be described as intelligent assessment of the situation. This animal has been scientifically documented as essential to a child's medical recovery, Dr. Rodriguez announced, presenting her preliminary research findings. Removing him at this critical juncture could cause irreversible psychological trauma that might compromise Emma's cardiac rehabilitation. Patterson's smile was coldly professional. Dr. Rodriguez, I appreciate your concern, but federal law is clear. This animal poses a significant risk to public safety, and emotional attachment cannot override legitimate safety concerns. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, if not for Emma herself. Against all medical advice and over the protests of every adult present, the 8-year-old had convinced a sympathetic nurse to bring her to the sanctuary in a wheelchair. Her pale face and obvious frailty created a stark visual contrast to the legal maneuvering surrounding her. "Why are you trying to take my friend away?" Emma asked Patterson directly, her voice carrying the moral authority that only children possess. Thunder has never hurt anyone. He protects people. He protected me when I thought I was going to die." Patterson's composure faltered slightly in the face of Emma's direct questioning. "Young lady, adults make decisions about dangerous animals based on scientific assessment, not emotional attachment." "Then why are you scared of him?" Emma's question was delivered with startling perceptiveness. "If you really thought he was dangerous, you wouldn't be trying to take him somewhere else. You'd want him to stay here where Dr. Thompson could watch him." The child's logic was unassailable, and Agent Hayes seized the opening. "Mr. Patterson, perhaps you could explain your connection to the Nevada facility you've selected for Thunder's relocation. My investigation into wildlife trafficking has identified several irregularities in their operations." The moment when Patterson realized his cover was blown played across his face like a slow-motion film. Years of careful planning, meticulous legal preparation, and patient surveillance crumbled under the combined weight of federal investigation and an 8-year-old's moral clarity. Thunder, as if understanding that the crisis had passed, moved to the fence nearest Emma's wheelchair and settled into his characteristic protective posture. The bear's action spoke louder than any legal document or expert testimony. This was not a dangerous predator, but a guardian whose only crime was loving too deeply. The battle for Thunder's freedom was won, but the war for truth was just beginning. The morning that should have marked Emma's triumphant return to the sanctuary instead became the darkest chapter in their story. Dr. Reeves had cleared Emma for supervised visits, and the entire staff had prepared a celebration for the brave little girl who had survived against impossible odds. Thunder's enclosure had been decorated with colorful ribbons, and even the normally stoic bear seemed to sense that something special was happening. Emma arrived in a specialized transport van, still connected to a portable heart monitor but glowing with excitement. Her first steps toward Thunder's enclosure were tentative but determined, each movement a victory over the medical equipment that had defined her world for the past week. "Thunder!" she called out, her voice carrying across the sanctuary with pure joy. "I came back just like I promised." The bear's response was immediate and profound. Thunder rose to his full, magnificent height, his massive frame silhouetted against the Montana sky as he moved toward the fence where Emma waited. The reunion between child and animal was everything Dr. Thompson had hoped for, proof that their bond transcended medical science and touched something deeper in the human spirit. But the joy lasted only moments. Emma had been sitting beside Thunder's enclosure for barely 10 minutes when the first signs appeared. Her portable heart monitor began beeping with increasing frequency, the rhythm becoming erratic in a way that made Dr. Thompson's blood run cold. Emma's face, which had been flushed with happiness, suddenly drained of all color. "Emma?" Maggie rushed forward as the child swayed in her wheelchair. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" The 8-year-old's eyes widened with terror as she pressed her hand to her chest. "It hurts," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the monitor's increasingly frantic alarms. "It hurts worse than before." Dr. Thompson immediately called for an ambulance while checking Emma's vital signs, but the readings were catastrophic. Her heart rate spiked beyond dangerous levels, then plummeted to barely detectable. The surgical repair that had seemed so successful was failing in real time, as if her body was rejecting the very life that had been restored to it. Thunder's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. The massive bear pressed against the fence with desperate urgency, his low rumbles of distress echoing across the sanctuary. For the first time since his arrival 6 years ago, Thunder attempted to breach his enclosure, his powerful claws scraping against the metal barriers that separated him from Emma. "She's going into cardiac arrest," Dr. Thompson announced with clinical precision that barely masked his panic. "The surgical site is showing signs of catastrophic failure. We need to get her to the hospital immediately." But even as the ambulance screamed through the Montana countryside, everyone knew they were fighting against impossible odds. Dr. Reeves met them at the emergency entrance with a team of cardiac specialists, but her face carried the grim expression of a physician who had seen this before. "The repair has completely failed," she explained to Maggie as they raced toward the operating room. "This sometimes happens with complex pediatric cardiac surgery. The tissue simply can't handle the stress of healing. We can try another procedure, but—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. They all understood that Emma's damaged heart had reached the limits of what medical science could repair. The child who had fought so bravely, who had inspired an entire community, was dying despite every effort to save her. In the ICU, Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, her small body overwhelmed by medications and life support equipment. During her brief moments of awareness, she spoke only of Thunder, asking repeatedly if someone was taking care of him, if he understood why she couldn't visit anymore. "He's scared," she whispered to Maggie during one lucid interval. "He thinks it's his fault that I'm sick again. Can you tell him it's not his fault? Can you tell him I'm not afraid because I know he loves me?" Maggie's composure finally shattered completely. Holding Emma's fragile hand, she wept with the accumulated grief of losing Tommy, facing the loss of the sanctuary, and now watching another innocent child slip away despite every prayer and sacrifice. Back at the sanctuary, Thunder's behavior became increasingly alarming. The bear had stopped eating entirely and spent hours pressed against the fence closest to the road, as if waiting for Emma's return. His mournful calls echoed through the valleys, a sound so heartbreaking that even seasoned wildlife experts found themselves moved to tears. Dr. Thompson documented every detail of Thunder's decline, recognizing that he was witnessing something unprecedented in animal behavior research. The bear's distress wasn't simple separation anxiety, it was profound grief, the kind of emotional depth that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal consciousness and capacity for love. "He's dying of a broken heart," Sarah Martinez observed after reviewing Thunder's latest blood work. "His stress hormones are beyond anything we've recorded. If Emma doesn't recover, I don't think Thunder will survive much longer either." The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone. Emma's miraculous surgery had been successful, but her body was rejecting the repair. Thunder's devotion to the child was killing him slowly, as if his massive heart couldn't function without knowing that Emma was safe and healthy. Governor Hartwell visited the hospital on Emma's fourth day in intensive care, bringing news that under different circumstances would have been cause for celebration. The FBI investigation had exposed Patterson's trafficking operation, leading to arrests across 3 states and the rescue of dozens of illegally traded animals. The scandal had generated national attention and funding commitments that would secure the sanctuary's future permanently. "We've won everything we fought for," the governor told Maggie quietly, "except the one thing that matters most." Agent Hayes had uncovered the full scope of Patterson's crimes, including evidence that Rebecca Williams' death had indeed been murder, not accident. The journalist had been closing in on the trafficking network when her car was forced off Highway 2 by one of Patterson's associates. Justice would be served, but it came too late to save the mother and daughter who had paid the ultimate price for pursuing truth. As Emma's condition continued to deteriorate, Dr. Reeves made a decision that violated every protocol in pediatric medicine. She authorized Thunder to be brought to the hospital, reasoning that if traditional medicine couldn't save Emma, perhaps the love that had sustained her this long deserved one final chance. The sight of the massive bear in the hospital corridor would have been absurd under normal circumstances, but nothing about Emma's story had been normal from the beginning. Thunder, secured with specialized restraints but calm in the presence of trusted handlers, was wheeled to the ICU where Emma lay unconscious, her vital signs fading despite every mechanical intervention. When Thunder saw Emma through the glass partition, his reaction was immediate and profound. The bear's mournful calls became gentle rumbles of recognition, and for the first time in days he settled into the watchful pose that had become his signature since meeting the little girl. Emma's eyes fluttered open at the sound of Thunder's voice, and for a moment her face brightened with the ghost of her former joy. "You came to say goodbye," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the medical equipment. The heart monitor's steady beeping began to slow, each sound marking the final countdown of a life that had touched everyone who knew her story. The flatline alarm pierced the ICU at 11:47 p.m., its mechanical shriek announcing the moment every heart in the room had been dreading. Emma's small body lay motionless on the hospital bed, the monitors displaying the cruel geometry of death, straight lines where life's rhythms had once danced. Dr. Reeves worked frantically over the child's still form, her hands moving with practiced precision through resuscitation protocols that seemed increasingly futile with each passing second. "Come on, Emma," she whispered fiercely, administering another round of cardiac stimulation. "You're stronger than this. Come back to us." Thunder's reaction was immediate and devastating. The massive bear, who had been maintaining his vigil outside the ICU window, released a roar of anguish that shattered the hospital's sterile quiet. The sound was primal, heartbroken, a voice of grief that transcended species and spoke to the universal pain of losing someone precious. Security guards rushed toward the commotion, but Dr. Thompson waved them away, understanding that Thunder's distress was as real and valid as any human mourning. Maggie collapsed into the bedside chair, her 72-year-old frame suddenly feeling ancient beyond measure. Twice now she had watched a child she loved slip away, first Tommy in the wilderness 15 years ago, and now Emma in this sterile room surrounded by machines that had promised salvation, but delivered only prolonged suffering. "I can't do this again," she sobbed, her weathered hands covering her face. "I can't bury another child. I won't survive it." 4 minutes passed, the critical threshold beyond which brain damage becomes irreversible, beyond which hope transforms into futile gesture. Dr. Reeves continued her efforts, but her movements had taken on the mechanical quality of someone going through motions rather than believing in outcomes. Then Agent Hayes burst through the ICU doors, her face flushed with urgency and something else. Hope, perhaps, or desperation masquerading as purpose. "Dr. Reeves, stop. You need to hear this before you call it." The federal agent's interruption violated every medical protocol, but something in her voice made Dr. Reeves pause her resuscitation efforts. Hayes was carrying a laptop computer and several files that she thrust toward the medical team with shaking hands. "I've been reviewing Rebecca Williams' research all night," Hayes said breathlessly. "Her investigation wasn't just about wildlife trafficking. She discovered something else, something about Thunder specifically. Look at these veterinary records from when he was brought to the sanctuary as a cub." Dr. Thompson moved closer to examine the documents, his scientific curiosity overriding the emotional devastation of the moment. The files revealed details about Thunder's rescue that had never been fully disclosed, medical anomalies that had been attributed to trauma but never properly investigated. Thunder wasn't just found near the site where Tommy Sullivan disappeared, Hayes continued urgently. He was found at the exact location at the exact time when the search teams gave up looking for the boy. And look at this. She pointed to a veterinary report from Thunder's first examination. The cub showed signs of severe head trauma consistent with a fall from significant height. The same kind of fall that would have killed a 7-year-old child. Maggie's head snapped up from her grief, understanding flickering in her tear-filled eyes. "What are you saying?" Hayes opened her laptop, revealing Rebecca Williams's final article. The piece she had been working on when she was murdered, the story that had cost her life. Rebecca discovered something that Patterson and his trafficking ring would kill to suppress. Thunder isn't just an unusually intelligent bear. According to her research into Native American tribal records and missing persons cases, there have been dozens of instances across North America where children who disappeared in wilderness areas were later found as animals with human-like intelligence and emotional responses. Dr. Reeves looked up from Emma's still form, her medical rationality warring with the impossible implications of what Hayes was suggesting. "Agent Hayes, this is not the time for—" "It's exactly the time," Hayes interrupted fiercely. "Because if Rebecca Williams was right, if the tribal legends about spirit transformation have any basis in reality, then Thunder isn't just mourning Emma, he's trying to save her the same way someone once saved him." The room fell silent except for the continued wail of medical alarms and Thunder's increasingly desperate calls from the corridor. The bear had begun throwing his massive weight against the reinforced glass, creating spider-web cracks that spoke to the incredible force of his distress. Dr. Thompson stared at the crescent-shaped mark on Thunder's forehead, visible even through the chaos and commotion. The mark that was identical to Tommy's birthmark, the intelligence that exceeded normal bear behavior, the emotional responses that had puzzled animal behaviorists for 6 years. All of it suddenly formed a pattern too precise to be coincidence. "You're talking about reincarnation," he said quietly. "You're suggesting that Tommy somehow became Thunder." Hayes shook her head. "Not reincarnation. Transformation. According to the tribal records Rebecca uncovered, shamans have been performing emergency spirit transfers for centuries, moving the essence of dying children into animal forms to preserve their lives. The trafficking ring wasn't just stealing unusual animals, they were harvesting children who had been transformed, selling them to private collectors who wanted pets with human-level intelligence." The implications crashed over everyone in the room like a tidal wave. If Thunder was indeed Tommy, transformed 15 years ago to save his life after a fatal fall, then his devotion to Emma wasn't just unusual animal behavior. It was a brother's love, a guardian's protection, a soul recognizing another soul in desperate need. Maggie stood on shaking legs, moving toward the ICU window where Thunder continued his anguished vigil. The bear's dark eyes met hers through the cracked glass, and in that moment she saw something that shattered her heart and rebuilt it simultaneously. The intelligence in those eyes, the pain, the desperate need to help, it was achingly familiar, terrifyingly real. "Tommy?" she whispered, her voice breaking on the name she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Thunder's response was immediate and profound. The massive bear pressed his paw against the glass where Maggie's hand rested, creating a connection that transcended the physical barrier between them. His rumbles softened into something that could only be described as recognition, as if he had been waiting 15 years for his mother to understand. Dr. Reeves, watching this impossible reunion unfold, made a decision that would either save Emma's life or destroy her medical career. If there's even a chance that Agent Hayes is right, we have to try something unprecedented. Get Thunder into this room. "Dr. Reeves," one of the nurses protested, "that's a 600-pound wild animal. Hospital policy." "Hospital policy doesn't cover situations like this," Dr. Reeves replied firmly. "Sometimes medicine requires leaps of faith. Sometimes healing comes from sources we don't understand." The next few minutes were chaotic as security protocols were overridden and specialized handlers brought Thunder into the ICU. The bear moved with surprising gentleness through the sterile corridors, his massive frame somehow understanding the solemnity of the moment. When he reached Emma's bedside, Thunder settled into position with the careful dignity of someone who knew exactly what was required. The bear's huge head came to rest near Emma's still hand, his warm breath creating condensation on the child's pale skin. For several seconds, nothing happened except the continued wail of medical alarms announcing the absence of life. Then, thunder began to sing. It wasn't a roar or a rumble. It was something else entirely, a low, melodic sound that seemed to vibrate through the hospital room and into the bones of everyone present. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, filled with love and loss and desperate hope. It was a lullaby, a prayer, a brother's promise that he would never let his little sister go. Emma's eyelids fluttered. The heart monitor registered the first tentative blip of renewed activity, a single spike in the flat line that made every adult in the room hold their breath. Thunder continued his unusual vocalization, his massive paw carefully positioned near Emma's hand as if trying to share his strength, his life force, his very essence with the dying child. Another heartbeat registered on the monitor. Then another. Slowly, impossibly, Emma's vital signs began to return to sustainable levels. Her breathing resumed with shallow but steady rhythm, and color gradually returned to her ashen cheeks. "Doctor." Reeves stared at the monitors in professional disbelief, unable to explain what she was witnessing through any medical framework she understood. "Her cardiac function is stabilizing. The surgical repair sites are showing signs of renewed healing. I don't understand how this is possible." Emma's eyes opened fully, focusing immediately on Thunder's massive form beside her bed. A smile spread across her face, the first genuine smile anyone had seen since her collapse days earlier. "I knew you'd find a way to bring me back," she whispered to the bear, her voice weak but clear. "I saw you in the white place. You and the boy who looks like you used to look. He said his mom was waiting for him to come home." Maggie's sob echoed through the ICU as 15 years of questions finally found their answers. Thunder, Tommy, had been waiting all this time for the right moment, the right person, the right crisis to reveal himself and complete the circle of love that death had interrupted but never truly broken. Emma reached out her small hand to touch Thunder's snout, and in that contact, two miracles converged. A child lived, and a mother found her son. 6 months after the miracle in the ICU, Sullivan Ranch Wildlife Sanctuary had become something unprecedented, a place where the impossible was simply another word for hope. The morning sun cast golden light across the expanded facilities as Emma Grace Sullivan Thompson walked hand in hand with her adoptive grandmother Maggie toward Thunder's enclosure, her heart monitor replaced by a healthy pink flush in her cheeks and laughter that echoed across the Montana valleys. The transformation had been gradual but undeniable. Emma's cardiac recovery had defied every medical prediction, her heart healing with the resilience of youth bolstered by something deeper than medical intervention. Dr. Reeves had documented the case extensively, though she privately admitted that her scientific training couldn't explain the complete reversal of what should have been irreversible damage. "The human heart," she had told a gathering of pediatric specialists, "is more mysterious than we give it credit for. Sometimes healing requires more than surgical precision. It requires love, hope, and connections that transcend our understanding." Thunder had undergone his own transformation. The massive bear, now officially designated as the sanctuary's first certified therapeutic animal, had developed an uncanny ability to sense distress in the children who visited the ranch. Word had spread throughout the medical community about the miracle bear who could calm autistic children, comfort young cancer patients, and provide emotional support for trauma survivors. Dr. Marcus Thompson, now Maggie's husband and Emma's adoptive father, had documented dozens of cases where Thunder's presence had facilitated breakthrough moments in therapy. The bear seemed to understand each child's specific needs, adapting his behavior from playful encouragement to gentle comfort as circumstances required. It's as if he has a direct connection to childhood trauma, Marcus explained to visiting researchers. He knows exactly how much interaction each child can handle, when to approach and when to maintain distance. His therapeutic instincts are more refined than those of therapists with decades of training. The sanctuary itself had evolved into something resembling a pediatric treatment center disguised as a wildlife preserve. The $2 million in federal research funding had allowed Maggie to construct state-of-the-art facilities that combined animal rehabilitation with cutting-edge child therapy programs. Children from across the country came to participate in the Sullivan Protocol, a revolutionary treatment approach that paired traditional medicine with animal-assisted healing. Emma had become the program's most visible success story and its most effective advocate. Her natural ability to communicate with animals, once dismissed as childhood imagination, was now recognized as a rare gift that enhanced the therapeutic value of every session. She served as a bridge between frightened children and the animals who could help them heal. "Thunder understands hurt," Emma would tell new arrivals, her 8-year-old wisdom carrying weight beyond her years. "He's been hurt too, but he learned that helping others makes the hurt smaller. When you help someone else feel better, you feel better too." The federal investigation into Patterson's trafficking ring had exposed a network that spanned decades and involved hundreds of illegally traded animals. Agent Hayes had been promoted to head a new task force dedicated to wildlife crime, with the Sullivan Ranch serving as a model for legitimate animal rehabilitation programs. Patterson himself had been sentenced to life in prison without parole for the murder of Rebecca Williams and his role in the trafficking operation. During his trial, he had maintained his innocence regarding the supernatural elements of the case, but evidence of his crimes was overwhelming even without the more mysterious aspects of Thunder's story. "Justice doesn't always look the way we expect," Governor Hartwell had remarked at Patterson's sentencing. "Sometimes it comes in the form of truth finally surfacing, families being reunited, and love proving stronger than greed." The question of Thunder's true nature remained officially unanswered, filed away in federal reports as anomalous behavioral patterns of unknown origin. But for those who had witnessed the miracle in the ICU, the truth was self-evident. The bear's intelligence, his emotional responses, his uncanny understanding of human need, all pointed to consciousness that transcended normal animal behavior. Maggie had stopped trying to reconcile the impossible with the rational. Whether Thunder was Tommy transformed by forces beyond scientific understanding, or simply an extraordinary animal with human-like empathy, the love was real, the healing was real, and the family they had created together was beautifully, undeniably real. "Some questions don't need answers," she often told visitors who pressed for explanations. "Some miracles just need acceptance and gratitude." The ranch had also become a pilgrimage site for families dealing with loss. Parents who had lost children came seeking comfort, and many found it in the peaceful interaction between Thunder and the children who still needed protection. The bear seemed to understand the depth of parental grief, offering gentle comfort to mothers and fathers whose hearts carried wounds that might never fully heal. Emma's relationship with Thunder had evolved into something resembling a normal sibling bond, if siblings could include a 600-pound bear. They played together daily, with Thunder carefully moderating his strength to match Emma's fragile recovery. They napped together in the afternoon sun, Emma curled against Thunder's massive flank while he maintained protective watch over her dreams. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had established a permanent research station at the ranch, studying the physiological effects of animal-human bonding on cardiac recovery. Her preliminary findings suggested that the emotional connections formed during therapeutic animal interactions could actually stimulate healing at the cellular level. "We're documenting cases where children's recovery rates improved dramatically after bonding with therapy animals," she explained to a visiting delegation from the World Health Organization. The Sullivan Ranch represents a new frontier in integrative medicine, one where love becomes a quantifiable healing agent. As autumn painted the Montana landscape in brilliant colors, the sanctuary prepared for its first annual Healing Hearts Festival, a celebration that would bring together families from across the country who had been touched by the program's success. The event would serve as both fundraiser and testament to the power of hope over despair, love over loss. Emma stood at the fence of Thunder's enclosure, now expanded to include several acres of natural habitat, watching her guardian settle into his favorite spot near the pond Harold had built decades earlier. The bear's contentment was visible in every line of his massive frame. The tensed alertness of earlier months had been replaced by peaceful satisfaction. "Are you happy, Thunder?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. The bear's response was a gentle rumble of contentment, the sound of a soul finally at peace. Maggie approached from behind, her arms wrapping around Emma in a hug that encompassed 3 generations of love. "We're all happy, sweetheart. For the first time in 15 years, our family is complete." As the sun set over the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky in shades of hope and healing, 3 hearts beat in perfect synchronization: a grandmother who had found her purpose, a child who had found her home, and a guardian whose love had transcended every boundary that nature and science had tried to impose. The sanctuary's mission statement, carved in stone near the entrance, captured the essence of their miracle: where broken hearts learn to beat again, where love knows no boundaries, and where every ending becomes a new beginning. In Thunder's gentle eyes, the future stretched bright with promise, filled with children who needed healing and families who needed hope, and the certainty that love in all its mysterious forms would always find a way. Dear friends, if this story touched your heart, you're not alone. At 55, 60, or beyond, we know life's deepest truths, that love doesn't end with loss, it transforms. Like Maggie Sullivan, many of us have weathered storms that seemed impossible to survive, losing spouses, watching children struggle, facing financial fears that keep us awake at night. But Emma and Thunder's miracle reminds us that our most profound purpose often arrives when we least expect it. The children in our lives, whether grandchildren, neighbors, or strangers who need guidance, are waiting for the wisdom only we can provide. Maggie thought her story was ending, but at 72, she discovered it was just beginning. Her political experience, her grief, her ranch facing foreclosure, everything she'd endured prepared her for this moment of pure purpose. Sometimes our greatest heartbreaks become our greatest strengths. Sometimes the love we thought we'd lost finds new ways to flourish. At our age, we understand that family isn't just about blood, it's about showing up, protecting the vulnerable, and believing in second chances. Your story isn't over. Your most important chapter might be just beginning. Questions for you. What unexpected blessing has emerged from your greatest challenge? How has your life experience prepared you to help someone who needs guidance today? Share your story below. Your words might be exactly what another reader needs to hear.